What's up, everybody? I'm Jason.
I'm Robbie, and welcome to the table.
Welcome to the table. Sorry, I fumbled that. We'll eventually get that right, or I'll eventually get that right. I was just so excited. Like I said, we are the Bards of the board, and this is our episode 2. The first episode was kind of a pilot, so we'll call this episode 2. Thank you for those who were able to watch it on YouTube, listen to it on your favorite podcast spot. So they're not everywhere yet. It takes some time. We'll eventually be there, but we're definitely thankful for that. We had a few comments already. Definitely some of my friends and family members have watched it, so we're truly thankful for all those who have listened in. If you have listened in, definitely give us some comments, give us some feedback as we go.
Yeah, it's fun when you're going through a world of like starting content creation, because when you first look at the numbers, you're like, okay, I know who those people are. I know who the 20 listeners are. So like when we put out the episode and we saw the people listening, we're like, oh, that's Nathan, that's Wes, that's Elizabeth. Like we're working through it, right? And we know everyone, but we're at almost 100 listens on just our first episode with really not a lot of push from outside sources. So really grateful to y'all listening. And I don't know who, I would say at least 50 of you are, which is really exciting. So we're super, super glad to have you guys at the table. And Jason, I don't know about you, but it's just been like a fun thinking about how do we improve? How do we just the future of where this is going.
For sure. I have to temper my excitement because I'm a board game geek and I can talk all day long about it, and make sure it's focused and key and clear what we're trying to pass along. But the excitement's there for sure. Like I've been pinging Robbie way too much about different ideas I have for both the podcast and the YouTube channel, because we're going to start putting a little bit more content. Like hopefully you'll see the first one next week. Spoiler, I'm going to try to do a little content where we talk about specific games we don't necessarily talk about on the podcast, but reasons why they're still good for beginners, because we can't cover all the games that I'd like to cover. So that's some of the little things we're going to stick out there on YouTube. So I'm very excited about that, and just trying to not go crazy with post stuff all day long. So it's exciting for sure to see. I will throw this out there. You're talking about some of the viewers and listeners we don't know. My daughter and my kids passed the podcast along to some of their D&D friends, so they definitely are listening to it to help us out. So that's good, and giving good positive feedback. But I'm not surprised. And I talked to my friend Joey, who got me into gaming, and he hadn't listened to it yet, but he was very excited. I said, Joey, you got the shout out because I'm at this podcast because of you. So he was very excited about that.
I love it. For Jason mentioned it, I am on another podcast in the disc golf space, but I am not on the like production side of the podcast when it comes to like pushing it out. So we're learning, we're getting those things out there. So hopefully we're on Spotify. If you're listening, and we're on Spotify, we're on most of the major platforms, hopefully Apple Podcasts, if you're listening to this now. And I'll go ahead and be that guy, especially with a newer podcast, things like that. If you're watching this on YouTube, helps us out a ton. If you're willing to like and subscribe, helps get the channel a little more traffic, gets that traction out there. And then if you're on podcasts, any of the podcast platforms, reviews. If you're like, man, the mic last week for Robbie was bad, hopefully a little better this week, but any reviews you give help out the podcast a lot. Just helps get it out to even more people. So we appreciate your support and how you're doing that. But that's a little bit on the technical side. Speaking of the things we've been up to lately, Jason, what games have you been playing as of late?
So I've been playing a few games, but I'll talk about 2 specific today. And one I actually did a quick post on. It was a Kickstarter deliver that came called Dreadful Meadows. It's basically the gameplay is it's Halloween themed, so perfect timing. Essentially, you're trying to create candy. You're planting plants. It's a fantastical world, right? You're planting plants where you're creating candy, and based on how you put those patches out, they're called patches that you're putting out in your garden, and then you put sugar sprites out. Those sugar sprites create candy on the orthogonally adjacent, or the ones that are perpendicular north, south, east, west, to where you put the sugar sprite, it'll create the candy. That candy essentially becomes your economy or your commerce. So the treacle teeth are $3, but the dreadful tree is worth $5. So every candy you create becomes your economy to buy more patches, which you continue to grow your board for those patches. You also have individual goals where you're turning those candy into to create these concoctions. And so that's the main in-game points is that. Then you also have these very unique things. They're I already forgot what they're called. They're basically like little harvesters is what they're called. So it looks like a little tractor. And when you buy a harvester, you put it out on a candy patch, and the sugar sprites kick off the harvester. So the sugar sprites makes candy, the harvester makes candy, and it becomes basically like that kind of an engine building game where you do one thing that kicks off another thing that kicks off another thing from the combo nature of it. We loved it. The tough thing, the gameplay goes really fast, so it's a 2 to 4 player game. Elizabeth and I played it twice. She won both games by 1 or 2 points each time because she beats me a lot. And what we discovered was the in-game condition was if there's no more patches, you get one more turn. That can happen in like 20 minutes. So we're going to house rule it. Because you take out a number of patches based on how many players there are, but we're going to house rule it. We're going to put more patches in just so the game can go longer. Because we were having fun, and the next thing you know, oh wow, the game just ended. That was really fast. Because for gamers who can really quickly go through it, it was fun. The art's fantastic. It's super cool looking, super cute. It's a Halloween themed game, but it's not like creepy themed at all. It's all about making candy. Lots of fun. There's a solo variant that's supposed to be pretty good. The only tough thing about Dreadful Meadows is that it's a Kickstarter delivery. I just got it. And from looking at social media, I was one of the lucky first ones who posted about it because there's very few reviews even out there of Dreadful Meadows. So that's one of the few times I got a Kickstarter very early. And so it's been fun to play for sure. Perfect for the holiday season. And I'll go ahead and tell you about the second game I've been playing as well. If that's good. So is Expeditions. Expeditions is a sequel to Scythe. So if you're a regular gamer, if you're listening to the podcast and you played games, you may know about Scythe from Jamie Stegmaier, kind of a post-apocalyptic world. Expeditions has the same art for Scythe, which is amazing art and super amazing minis. I'll show you this mini. I got the Ironclad edition, so it's a metal mini, and it's just the minis are just crazy. They're so cool, but it is a hand management game. You're using cards to basically take action. So it's not necessarily worker placement, but you're using cards to move your mini around the board, which is essentially a bunch of tiles that are randomly placed out. And when you go to those spots, you're taking actions there. So based on the card you play, you may get a resource, guile or corruption to do something later on to turn that in. So it's basically hand management. On your board, you have cards you're using to play, but it's not a traditional deck builder in that your cards are in your hand. What's unique about this is your cards are always face up. In your hand is face up on the left side of your player board, so you always see them and everybody knows. And once you've played them, your action row is to if you're looking down on it, your right side of your player board. And so that's how the game goes. And then on each action, you're basically taking 2 of 3 possible actions until you reset. A lot of stuff I throw out there, but the gist of it is you have cards that have amazing artwork that let you move the mini around to do things, whether you're producing resources, whether you're getting new cards, or you're melding meteorites, you're creating items which give you more abilities. And it's an awesome game. It's 2 to 5 player, but we played 2 player and it was still like an hour and a half game. We played a 3 player game with Ryder a few weeks ago and it was like an hour and a half game. Because the tough thing about this game, it's for a newer player, the gameplay is very easy, but it's going to be a long game because there's only so many spots you can go to get the actions to take actions to get the engine going, because it's between being a hand management game and almost like an engine building game, because you'll start comboing the cards in your action row. It can take a while. I couldn't imagine playing this at 5 players because it would just take too long. 3 players is the max I'd want to play it. This is one that on one of your trips I definitely want to play with you, just because you know the Scythe world. The games are totally different, but the art is just amazing, and the gameplay is really cool. So I like Expeditions. Is very cool. I got the Ironclad edition, which has the upgraded components and stuff, and it's awesome. The player mat just came in. He released a player mat late, so I bought the player mat as well because I thought it was awesome.
Come on. Okay. Dude, sounds, what I appreciate of like just hearing it is like with your journey is you have like Elizabeth also being a gamer, y'all can hit some like crunchier stuff in terms of like some more, like games that have a lot of meat on the bone And I know for like my wife, for instance, there is definitely a threshold, and the threshold's up there. Like she will play some, but you take a game that takes more than an hour, and like instantly her willingness to dive in is much lower, especially a midweek game, because she is getting home from work and like, you know what? As she is I would say that she plays games. I would not describe her at her core as a gamer, if that makes sense.
I can relate to that for sure. Like, and I'm thankful that Elizabeth is definitely a gamer, but I also know that I've sometimes pushed us playing too many games, and she does it because she's a good wife. But I can tell, wow, I've thrown too many games at her at one time, so I need to back off a little bit. Like for the last 2 weeks, all those games we played were on the weekend because her coworker in her office was gone, so she was solo in an office, so she was working late every day. So we didn't even play a single game at night at all. So all of our games we've played have been on the weekend the last 2 weeks for that very reason, because I knew not to even try to play a game with her because she just wanted to kind of decompress at night, for sure. So I'm thankful for that she's willing to go deep and go on those longer games.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I'm excited. We have not been playing a lot of games around here in the Crawford household because honestly, we just haven't been home. It is the first weekend that in fact, the only weekend that I will spend at my house in all of September was this past weekend. And I spent most of that Saturday up in a northern part of Alabama getting a tattoo. So it was a pretty chill here. But while we traveled, I have played some games while Lindsay has been like a little exhausted from work and the travel, because thankfully with my job, I have like a good amount of flexibility so I can make things happen. But shifting around the schedules. So one of my favorite activities that I like to do when I have a hankering for gaming, but I can't find people to play with, is my favorite solo game is I have villainous tournaments. And what I do is I take so Villainous is a game where it's almost like single player solitaire, where you are playing as the Disney villains from the Disney franchise, and each player has their own unique board or their own unique deck essentially that plays on a board. The art is officially licensed by Disney, so it is, if you are a Disney fan, man, it is so beautiful getting to play that game. But each of the villains plays differently because of their deck. So what I like to do, and I did this back when I was like a Yu-Gi-Oh player as well, is I would test my decks against each other and try to like wipe my mind of, okay, I know that they have this card or they've played this. What would I do like strategically playing against and whatnot? So I will play Villainous against myself, and I set the games up around the table. You guys I'll take a picture of it when I'm doing this so that you guys can see it on our Instagram. But I play a tournament against myself, and I just make a bracket, and I draft all of the villains into the bracket, and it takes me a long time to move through the bracket. But so that's what I've been doing. And then the other game we played is when we traveled. A friend actually brought, and I think a lot of times when you're hearing like this hobby gaming channel, you can hear the words of like Cascadia, the game that we're going to talk about today. You can hear Settlers of Catan, Carcassonne, Expeditions, right? Dreadful Meadows. But sometimes, you just want to hit them with a classic, like an OG. And Uno will always hold a special place in my heart. But we played a version of Uno, Jason, that I've never heard of before, but this game was fascinating. Have you heard of Uno Flip?
I have not heard of Uno Flip.
Okay, so here's the concept of Uno Flip. Everything that you know about Uno and you love about Uno, right? Like the draw fours, or draw four wilds, the draw twos, the skips.
Skips.
So
reverse.
One of the cards on there is a flip. And so every Uno card, on the back side of it, also has like basically a whole new set of the game in different colors. So instead of like red, blue, yellow, green, it's like teal, orange, purple, and like red or something like that. So when you play a flip card, you flip the whole drawing deck over, and everybody flips their hands around as well to the other side. Now the colors are not like
Yeah.
coordinated, so it's not like, oh, every green on the normal side is like teal on the other side, because that way you can't. But you can look when someone's getting down low and being like, okay, they've got a teal and a red, or they only have red left. Okay, I'm going to play a flip, and we're going to make sure that we don't get to red, so that way. So it is a fascinating, so fun, and so many frustrating moments of like all the Uno joy you get, but flipping it around. So I'll always appreciate a simple game, because that's also when we travel, like, it's very easy. We were at a wedding, and as we were waiting for time to pass at the wedding, we played a lot of Uno Flip. So,
yeah, that's cool. Yeah, we've played a bunch of different variations of Uno with the kids when they were young, because there were just so many different variations of Uno, and we loved them all for sure. I haven't played any of those, but you can't go wrong with that. I'm still, because of my board game snobbery, I acknowledge it. Like, I have similar games, but they're just not big brand names, right? Because Uno Flip is their way of staying relevant with hobby gamers, because that sounds, if you didn't call that Uno, a hobby gamer would be like, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
If you called it anything other than Uno, but if a hobby gamer, snobbish hobby gamer like me, here's Uno, like, I'm not playing that. But really, if you called it anything else and changed the theme, but the colors and concepts are the same, it'd probably be a hit for those quick, easy games, to the travel games, right? And so, for sure, I'm confessing my sins, you know, right now, because it is true. Because we are biased. Too many of us are biased against those names of things. Because I have other. When you were talking about that, I was like, oh, wow, that actually sounds, it has game mechanics similar to some other games, small games we have. That I'm like, well, if it wasn't called Uno, I probably would, and it was in Dice Tower reviewed it, we'd probably love it, right? So that's, I like that that's out there, and that you will help keep me relevant with that, because I would never look at that, to be honest, right? But having this podcast will force me to think about my preconceptions of such things, for sure, because that is pretty cool. Yeah. So we have a few. Like, that's eventually one of our episodes may be about our best small games like that. Because we have similar. So thinking about quick games, we have a number of them that are 5 to 10 minute games. Yeah. And it's kind of like at a game night, you play it as everybody's coming in, or to close out the night, that it's so quick and easy once you know how to play it. That's the way it goes. And that's exactly what. But the flip may kind of mess around, because Uno can get extended, because you can do so many fun things. But at least it changes it up, and it's not just the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I will always be a strong proponent of, I mean, the intro that we have on this channel, right? Welcome to the table. I never want us to be a podcast, and I want to, like Jason said, I want to move past the stigma of, like, because I think of a game like Love Letter, for instance, that there's so many copies of Love Letter that exist out there, and like, you try to convince a hobby gamer to play a simple, easy card game, like Love Letter pops out there, and you're like, oh, sick. Okay. Yeah. Like, people play that all day, because it's this niche little small game. I mean, it's not niche inside the larger hobby gaming world, but if you're new to the hobby gaming world, you'll be like, I've never heard of Love Letter in my life. But you're right. Like, we say Uno, and people are like, oh, I'm going to play Yahtzee. Ugh. But we won't play Yahtzee, but we'll play King of Tokyo.
Exactly. Which is basically battle Yahtzee, or it's attack Yahtzee. That's really what it is, right? I mean, that's what Marvel or Dice Throne. I don't know if you ever played Dice Throne. We had it for a while, but it just didn't hit. But it's similar, that you're rolling dice and you're using the dice to do different things to attack each other. It's essentially battle Yahtzee, and it's awesome. But if you hear Yahtzee, like you said, we push away. Like, funny side note, we have 2 love letters. We have the Marvel love letter, which is a little different. They add little bitty things, and it's fine. We also have Batman love letter that's not in print anymore. And at different times, that little bitty box that I have is worth anywhere from $80 to $100. It's just wild that, because it's out of print, and because it's the Batman one, and we haven't played it in years, but my kids love it so much, I can't, like, I'd only sell that if literally I'm broke and I need money, and it's still worth money at the time. So, but it's funny. That's a whole different side of the world of the collectability of those games. So,
I love it. Well, guys, we can get sidetracked on just this section of the episode alone. So you'll have to forgive us as we're learning our banter and all that. I'm looking down at the clock and I'm like, all right, we're already 20 minutes into this and we haven't even gotten to the main heart of the episode. So in order to do justice for the episode, we're going to do our best to kind of hone in this time. So like I said, stay with us and forgive us. But we want to talk about a game today. Our first game that we're bringing to the table for you to discuss as the Bards is Cascadia. Cascadia is a game that was released in 2021. Game designer is Randy Flynn. The publishing company was Flat Out Games. For those of you who we want to make sure if you're looking these things up, that you can see all that. I don't even think Jason expected me to throw information out like that. But the goal of the episode is for us. Jason's going to give you kind of a breakdown. I would say a little more in depth than even what when we talked through when he was talking about Expeditions in Dreadful Meadows. So I'm going to give you a breakdown of the game, kind of highlighting sort of. I'm not going to say how it's played in terms of like, oh, you can listen to this and then just go play the game. But the mechanics that are involved in it, things like that. And then we are going to talk about some things we like about the game, some things we maybe don't like about the game, and how it connects with beginners. And then at the end of it, we are going to give it a rating on the cookie scale. As a quick reminder for the cookie scale, we have 5 different wonderful little delectable options on our cookie scale that start with an A to F scale. And that A to F scale we have at F at the very bottom. Sorry for the people that this is you, but we have an oatmeal raisin cookie. And the D category, we have a sugar cookie, and then we have a peanut butter cookie as C, a homemade chocolate chip cookie as our B, and then our A, the top tier, is a double doozy. It is 2 wonderful cookies with a smattering of icing in the middle. And so the beautiful part is also Jason and I may not always agree on what the rating actually should be for these. So we're each going to give it a rating and assign that. And then hopefully that helps guide. I think another beautiful part about this, Jason, that we didn't even discuss is like, I wonder how, as this podcast develops, as listeners, I know we both probably do this with Dice Tower. Like we will see that one of our, like we align with this person's like, oh, man, it feels like I always agree with like, oh, this person really liked that game. So I'm wondering if there will be moments like that where they're like, Jason really loves this game. And I really like Jason's suggestions. I'm kind of hit or miss on Robbie. So like if Jason's calling it a double doozy, I got to check it out kind of a deal.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because there, without doubt, is that way. I've watched enough reviewers now on YouTube that if certain ones, I will keen in more to what they say. Not that the other people's opinions aren't important, but I know, like in general, there's certain games that Tom Vassell from the Dice Tower loves that I know I love, but there's ones he loves that I know I don't. But I've watched enough to be able to filter that out. So I agree. I haven't thought about that, but it would be fun and interesting because our game tastes are different, right? As more we've played together, more we've talked, we realize some things we both hone in on and some we differ on because it just doesn't hit to us the same way. So it'll be fun.
Game on. Well, tell us about Cascadia.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I will say this too, that we will do our best for the main game we highlight to be a game you could go buy right now, that it's easy to buy. Cascadia, it's at Target, Barnes & Noble, any of the game stores that are online, Amazon as the big one, but there's a lot of game stores, Game Nerds, Cool Stuff Inc. Most of them will have Cascadia in stock. So one of our goals will be the main game we highlight to be a game you could buy right now. Not that we're trying to get your significant other upset at you for buying games, but at least that if you really find a game that we talk about that you like, that you could go buy that game. So that'll be our goal. Some of our ones we talked earlier, like Dreadful Meadows, you can't even get right now unless you go buy it off eBay from someone else. But our highlight game will be one that ideally you can buy. So in Cascadia, you are trying to, the theme of what's fun is we're going to talk about the theme on these as well, because theme hits hard for some people, especially newer gamers. They may like the idea of some of these themes. So the theme of Cascadia is players are working to create the most diverse landscape in the Pacific Northwest. For those who don't know, and I learned this from reading the instruction book, the rule book for Cascadia, the area of northern Washington State up into western Canada, British Columbia apparently is known as Cascadia. And so the designers were inspired by that. So that's where, and in trying to create that landscape, landscape is inspired by how the landscape is and the animals that are out in the Cascadia region of North America. So in Cascadia, you're trying to competing with each other. It's a competitive game. Over time, we'll talk about cooperative games. We're all working together, but the ultimate goal of the game is to score the most points. The way you score the most points is based on the game mechanics. So the key game mechanics in Cascadia, and the reason we talked about this one first, is it's essentially tile placement. You're going to draft a tile and put it out. The tiles have a variety of, there's 5 different type of terrain that are on there: desert, forest, grassland, water, and mountains, with beautiful art by Beth Sobel, another artist in the board game sphere. She does a lot of the Jamie Stegmaier games, Wingspan, Between Two Cities. She's a well-known artist in the board game world, and her art's amazing on this. You're laying out tiles that have 5 different type of landscapes on them. The great thing that makes one of the reasons Cascadia is great for beginners is because there's no restriction on where you place the tile. Everyone will start with essentially a single piece that already has some landscapes on there, and then you draft a tile and you can place that anywhere. Right? How you place it will dictate in-game scoring, but there is no restriction to where you place that. Additionally, you will draft an animal token that you can place in one of the tiles. The tiles have animals, the same animal symbol on those tokens. And so you have to, if you draft a bear in a tile, that bear token has to go on a tile that has a bear. If you don't have that, then the animal token goes away. But we've yet to play a game where we tossed an animal token. So you're drafting those tiles, putting them out, and then drafting the animals and putting them out. And that's the entire gameplay. That's the gist of the game. If that's all you ever heard, you could play Cascadia and finish the game today. You draft a tile and an animal token, put the tile wherever you want, as long as adjacent to another tile, and then you put the animal token on a tile that has that animal's picture on there. So that's the gameplay, which I love for newer gamers, even for experienced gamers, but for newer gamers, I love ease of gameplay. That's the entire game. What makes Cascadia the variety that it gives you is that you also have variable scoring goals. So you have 2 types of scoring goals. The way you put those animals out will dictate the scoring. And so in the game comes with 5, there's 5 different animals in the game: bears, hawks, salmon, elk, and foxes. And they come out with a scoring card that says, hey, for every pair of bears, you get this many points. If you have this many elk in a row, those animal tokens, you get this many points. So each animal has 4 different possible scoring goals. The rule book even says, hey, for your first game, start with these because these are easier to contemplate how to score, and then move up to the B, to the C, to the D, the way they're labeled. So that's a scoring goal, and that's just what you score based on how you place those animal tiles out. Now, that's where restrictions come in place, because sometimes it can say 2 foxes can't touch each other. If they don't touch, then you get scoring, but if they touch, then it negates the scoring. So that's one in-game scoring. That variety is almost infinite replayability because you could have different kind of scorings on that. But you also, the other scoring goal you have is the landscape itself. So 5 different landscapes. You, at the end of the game, essentially score for your largest landscape, the number of tiles. So if you had 5 tiles that all together make a desert, that would be 5 points. But if your water is just 3, is your largest body of water, it's 3. And then the unique thing that I haven't seen in too many other games, whoever has the most of those, so whoever has the largest, so you're going to get a score for all your largest desert, but whoever has the largest desert of everybody who's playing at the table also gets a bonus as well. So for the animals, you're scoring yourself. That's just, you're going to score how your plateau, how your board looks. But that bonus for the size of your landscapes, you actually are competing against other folks on the table, whether it's 2 people or 4 people. It goes up to 4 people. And so that's your 2 type of variable scoring. And that bonuses can change the game. There have been games I've played where I have not paid attention to what other people's landscapes are. I'm like, oh, wow, I've got this big desert and this big grassland. And oh, wow, they have a bigger desert and a bigger grassland. And I totally ignored the mountains. And they were consistent enough among the size of theirs and those bonus points at the end. So that's the good thing about the game to me is the variable scoring for sure. And the ease of gameplay, the variable scoring, we talked about those things. There's one more little nuanced thing. So it also has, we talk about tile laying. So it teaches you tile laying, talk about goal scoring, pattern building, but it also shows us the concept of drafting. So when I said, and I kind of skipped over it too fast, when you take an animal, a landscape token and an animal token, there's 4 that are out. And so of those 4, I actually have tokens here for those who are on the YouTubes. So you're gonna take a landscape tile and an animal token out, and then place it on your board. But there are 4 out on the board. There are 4 out on the table, and so you have to choose. When you choose your landscape tile, you have to choose the animal that's randomly drawn out by that. So you're teaching that the idea of drafting. During the game, there's ways to get pine cones, and those pine cones you can choose. You can kind of mix up how you draft those things. You can wipe all the animals if you're looking for a specific animal for your in-game scoring, or you can choose an animal that's over 1 tile and a different landscape tile to put on your board. So kind of rushed through that. Like I said, Robbie said, we weren't trying to give the details of how to play. You won't know how to play from listening to that, but I'm trying to give you the concepts of it. But yeah.
Yeah. I think one of you mentioned it a lot, the ease of the gameplay. I think that's one thing that I really enjoyed about this a lot is when I play a game, and Jason and I are pretty much both the people that when we sit down to a table, everyone looks at to us and is like, teach me how to play this game. You'll find is you get into the hobby gaming space that there is that person, and like if we have guests come over to our house and they bring a game, sure, they can do that. Or like even when I've gone to Jason's house and I brought a game, I switch into that role, right? But this is something that one of the most common questions I ask is always, Jason, what's a good score for me to get to? And so I hear this like initial target of here's some averages of the games they've played in the past, and then maybe a 57 or like a 63 or something like that. Okay, so I need to be in high 50s, low 60s. That's what I'm aiming for. But in terms of ease of gameplay, because there is no like, I'm going to be stuck without a move. I think that is a fear that a lot of people have when they dive into gaming. Cascadia, like you mentioned, is just so beautiful for that. Because in theory, there's not a bad move. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Every time you're always going to get a tile, and we have yet, and Elizabeth and I played it real quick today when we got home just to get it fresh on my mind. And of our 7 known plays, we have more than 7 plays, but we've never once had someone not place an animal. So you always will place a landscape token, always. But we've never had someone not place an animal. Now, in the rule book, it says if you can't place it, you just don't. But in our 7 plays, it's probably over 10 to 12 plays because we've had this game longer than I use my app to track plays. So you always have something good to do. You always have something to do. And that something is always good because it's going to add to your end game no matter what. Based on how you draft and where you put that, it's going to be part of that end game scoring. So I agree. You always have something to do. It's not a boring token like, oh, I get an iron. Now I got to get another iron.
Yeah.
Now I can spend 2 iron to get this. Now I got to spend. It's not that, which some of the heavier Euro games that take longer. Yeah. That's what you just kind of bide your time. Cascadia is positive reinforcement every time because you're doing something good.
Yeah, and I do enjoy, like Jason said, like if you're playing like a Settlers of Catan, and man, okay, I keep getting this 8 rolled. Okay, that gives me iron every time, or gives me ore. Sick, that's nice, but like I'm trying to do this thing over here. The nice thing for Cascadia is because the drafting system, it kind of stretches you strategically, which is something I think that like a good intro game for beginners does as well. Is it's not so straightforward that there is no creative gameplay and you're not being like asked to focus on multiple things at a time. But like, okay, I really need a falcon or a hawk to go. Like I really need a hawk in that area because that's just going to work really well right now. So then you're looking at the drafting board and you're like, oh, the only hawk is tied to a grasslands and like a mountain tile. Well, that's not great for me right now. But the nice thing is because there's no tile restriction, I can accomplish the goal that I'm looking for with that falcon piece while also investing in my future. Or I'm looking around and no one else is really diving into mountains yet. I can go ahead and get the mountains cooking. Like right. There's beauty to that. And I completely agree with Jason. In fact, I think the game that we played, it was me, Jason, and Elizabeth playing. We got to the end and I was not paying too much attention to anyone else's landscapes except for water. it's like a running joke when I'm up there is I find one aspect of the game and I just go all in on this. And so I was the water guy and I'm building this huge waterscape and I look over and I only like maybe had like one more water than Jason, and he had been so silent about it the entire time. And then we look over and Elizabeth has just killed us on every other like environment. It was insane. And so that is, I love that you can kind of live in your world and just try to score as you want to the best of your ability. But the gameplay is also enriched by interacting and looking at other people.
Yeah, I agree. And without doubt, for sure. And I even looked at our scores, which I'll talk about in a second, but they, along those same lines, and we'll talk about different games when it comes to player interaction, but there's no, other than what that player drafts, so that player right in front of you may take that landscape tile and animal you really wanted. Other than that, players can't mess with each other in this game. King of Tokyo, which we talked about, you're definitely messing with each other. Yeah. This is such an entry-level gateway game because you go in knowing Robbie can't really mess with me unless he just happens to draft the tile I wanted. But there's 4 other tiles and 4 animal tokens out there that I always get something good about that. So with that, basically no player interaction or low player interaction, they can't do anything to mess with you. So you always have the good vibes for it. Now, again, at the same time, as Robbie said, if you're not paying attention to what other people are doing, they can mess with your in-game scoring because they're going much more strategic on it. What I love about another reason I love Cascadia is because I'm looking at the scores of the last 3 games. So Liz and I played. She smoked me today. Big surprise. But so when me, you, and Elizabeth play, like I don't go light. If I'm playing with a brand new gamer, I may try a different strategy, right? The newer gamer, just because I don't want to, because I played so much. I didn't do that with you, and Elizabeth won 105 to you 93 and me 89. And I consider myself a pretty good gamer. That's what's great about Cascadia because, as you said, if you're not paying attention what other people are doing, you can still have fun and think you're doing well, and the other player come out like, okay, well, I got you. Or you can be that person who's just having fun and realize, oh, wow, I had this massive water because I didn't realize Robbie wasn't going for water or whatever it may be. And then we played with Dakota and Marissa, who are newer gamers. They're not brand new. They've played a few. And I was last place again. Elizabeth smoked us again. Elizabeth,
apparently she's
her
a
gloves
Cascadia
drop
person.
off when she plays with people. Yeah, because she is. We were looking at, she's won the last 4 games of Cascadia that she's played. But I finished in last, and Dakota and Marissa both beat me, and it was their first time playing it. And they definitely don't have the experience you have, but they were able to grok it pretty quick and see what was going on. And we even highlighted that, hey, don't forget about your players, your right and left, the stuff we're going for. So, but that low player interaction can definitely have that lower barrier of entry because you're not worried about what someone else is gonna do to you for sure, and you can just sit there and have fun. And that's the other thing too. At the end of that game, if you're going into it really wanting to win and someone pulls it out from under you, well, that's any game will do that. But at the end of the game, you're going to look at that board and go, oh, wow, look how cool this board looks. I have 9 tiles that are water or 7 tiles that are these mountains, and I have animals all over them. So if you jump into the theme, you should have these animals living in this landscape that's there because the art, even though it's a basic hexagon, the art's pretty detailed and pretty awesome looking.
Yeah, and there is something I really like on the tile lane because there's not restrictions in terms of like you have to have it affects your scoring separation. But if I'm remembering right, like you don't have to. Let's say I have like a mountain and a water tile. They don't technically, either of them don't have to be touching mountain or water right off the bat, right? It affects the scoring later on, but I could just throw those wherever. So it's a fun game as well. Let's say you're trying to go for a really cool environment that has like a lot of pieces to it. Well, you can kind of build like this lake over in one section, and then just as the tiles start coming to you, you're like, oh, I'm going to be able to take this lake and connect it to that lake over there. And I definitely didn't think that was going to happen like 5 turns ago. And so that is just... It is so fun, and like something we're not even talking about is the scoring goals, which relate to the animals, and it is so fun because these are all hexagon pieces, like Jason's telling, and so when you're piecing them all together, how you're connecting those hexagons is intriguing, but also the pattern in which you lay the animal tokens can be so unique as well. You'll have like, if I remember, I think there's like a fox one where the fox wants to be touching unique animals all around it. And so for every unique animal it's touching, that matters. And then you have like bears, like you mentioned, where if one bear is touching another bear, it's bad. Like there's just, and then you have like hawks that if the hawks are flying in a straight line, that's points. And like there's just so many variables to, you can even go really invested in the bears, or you can be like, I'm gonna grab a bear if I get the chance to, buff up the fox for this particular fox goal. But you know what? I'm a hawk guy. I know our friend Brad, if he plays this game, I just know that I'm probably not going to get any hawks the whole time, because this man literally has red-tailed hawks tattooed on his arm, and they're in the game.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you hit one of the key points I wanted to highlight was that scoring variety can be, if this is one of your only games you own, there's nothing wrong with that, because the variety is so different. The gameplay is the same, so it's easy. You don't have to look too hard in the rules because you know how the gameplay goes, and it's easy to even teach your other friends how to play. But the variety is there, because like on the YouTube, like there's a card. So this one is for the red-tailed hawk, Brad. If they're within line of sight, but none of the hawks cannot be touching each other. So for every 2 hawks, they're line of sight, 5 points. Every 3, 9 points, 12 on up. So the more hawks you have on the board that aren't touching each other but are in line of sight, as in directly through other tiles, that increases your points. One I had was for elk. So if you had a single elk, it was 2 points. But if there were 2 in a straight line, because when they're migrating, they go in straight lines, trying to go to the thematics, it got more and more up to 13 points for if you had 4 in a straight line, not catty corner to each other. So that's what that scoring variety is so nice. And then you can you can mix and match based on what you want to score for the game. You can randomly shuffle them out and go from there. There's a family version of it as well, where the scoring isn't as intricate. So if you have younger kids who want to play the tile laying out, we haven't played that yet, but it basically eliminates the intricate scoring, but there's still scoring goals within there based on how you lay stuff out. I love the fact they put the family variety in there. And then you also can play it solo. I haven't done it solo, but the gameplay is super easy. You're still just building your board, and after your turn, you essentially going to get rid of a single landscape tile and an animal, and then you're going to keep playing until you put out all your tokens. And it has essentially it has goals in the back of the rule book. It has, so if you play with these 5 scoring cards, here's what your goal should be: 85 points or 80 points or whatever it may be. If you play with these cards, because the cards, there's 4 scoring goals per card, and they're labeled A through D. So Red Tail Hawk has 4 different scoring varieties. If you happen to get the Kickstarter edition, that comes with extra cards, so there's a few more of it as well. And so you can even go solo and try to go for those achievements in the back of the book. And the gameplay is still super quick. If you're playing solo, it's like a 20-minute game, because you're basically just, I think the way the math works out, whether you're playing a 2, 3, or 4-player game, you're going to place 20 tiles, because you take out or add tiles based on how many players are playing. So you're always going to place exactly the same number of tiles, whether it's a 2, 3, 4-player game or a solo game. So so you always know it's going to be that amount of time, and that the variety of scoring there just makes it fun. Because we even had one tonight that with all of our plays, we had one tonight that we had not scored. We had one because it's a D card that basically we got 1 point for every salmon. So if salmon like to do a run up a river, right? So our run had to be at least 3 salmon, but for every animal touching that, we got 1 point for it. And so mine was like 14 points because I had a long run of salmon, and then a bunch of animals. Didn't matter if it was 3 bears or whatever. It was just however many total animals were touching it along the river with that. So they ended up getting like 13 or 14 points. But that was the first time we'd actually had that scoring card, and we played the game a lot. That variety, the difference of goals. You always have the same in-game scoring for your landscape tiles. And whoever has the most of those landscape, the largest of each of those terrain tiles. So you have the consistency of that, but then the variety of the animal scoring makes it definitely fun and a different game every night. And like I said, if it was one of your only games, you could play it a ton. Never play the same game twice.
Yeah, man. Let's talk cost and availability, because I also want to. I don't know if this will factor into this conversation, but I want to make sure that we discuss being realistic about the board game each episode. I want to make sure, like, do we find something that we don't like, about the game, and diving into that. So cost coming in at $40 for this box. Now I've bought a lot of games. I've been gifted a lot of games. Jason, I would say you've got a much better read on the board game market value to even size. How do you feel this lands as a $40 game?
I think it's, and I'm not just saying this because it's our first game on our podcast, but I think $40 is right. It's right at that limit, because $40 is kind of where the number is for games today. And we not necessarily the monopolies or stars you see, but like the hobby games, $40 for MSRP is a fair cost for that, because of the replayability we've talked about, because of the ease of play, the ease of entry into that game. $40 is definitely it. And if you want it today and pay $40 is great, but often at the online game stores, not necessarily your friendly local game store, but like any of the online ones will often have it on sale for like $32 to $34. If you go to one of the miniature markets or Game Nerds or something like that. Amazon's the same way. It'll be on sale from time to time, but $40 is definitely, you're going to get $40 worth of game out of that, because there is so much replayability in that. And then the availability we already talked about. It's definitely at Barnes & Noble. You won't see it on sale too much at Barnes & Noble, but you could go right in and get it. I've seen it there most of the time when I go to the Barnes & Noble here. It's typically available on Amazon and other locations as well. I've seen it in Target as well. So,
yeah, I'm with you. I think $40 feels like, once again, we talked about Uno at the beginning, but it's making that jump to, you're going to go to Walmart, you're going to go to a Target, and you're going to see Sorry on the table for $20, and you're like, all right, that's the price of a board game. You got to understand that it's not that Sorry and Monopoly were not designed by game designers, things like that, but as the industry has developed, the modern, you're paying the artists and things like that. So for how much detail is packed into this, I think $40 is a great investment. And the way I view it is, if you get 2 date nights out of it, which you'll get way more because of the replayability, for me and my wife to simply go to the movies before we even just to get in the door for tickets, we're spending $30 basically to get in the door on an evening show. So we need 2 date nights out of this game, and it's paid for itself. So I think $40 is a great place. And like we said, the availability is huge. I do enjoy that. In fact, actually, as I'm looking at it on Amazon right now, it is on sale for $32. So if you're listening to this and you're like, you know what, I'm going to jump in, the first game suggestion they're going for, or the first game they're reviewing, Cascadia, great choice. I think I have a friend who now lives in Oregon, and if, like, when she comes to visit, I will have this game ready to play with her next time, because she's a very outdoorsy person, and like, I know my wife, her and I can sit down and play this game and have a blast. Super fun. So Jason, I will say, is there something about the game that you're like, I dislike this aspect of it? Is there anything that kind of stands out for you in terms of like, it does? Because I have something, if you need to think about it, I have something to start us off.
I have something, and it's not a major one.
Yeah.
And when it comes to gameplay, I don't have anything. When it comes to art, I will step back before I say this to say, so there's another game in the same game line called Calico that maybe we'll talk about one day, that's similar concept. You know this as well, Robbie, that all you're doing is literally placing a tile. That's all you do in the entire game, but you have so many restrictions on how you play that and how you do the scoring that lots of people don't like Calico. And when we played Calico, like I said, you don't really talk a lot during Calico because you're so focused. But Cascadia, and we didn't really talk about it, but Cascadia, there are times when you're head down, okay, but then you can still chit chat between turns, right? 2-player game is a little less because you're going back and forth. But when we played with Dakota and Marissa, there was enough joking and messing with each other that it was still a social type game, though there were times we were head down. Whereas Calico, for those who played Calico, and eventually there'll be a game that we talk about we played, you're hardly talking at all because you're literally, it's so tight. But so when I played Calico, I love Calico. Love Calico so much. And when Cascadia first came out, I'm like, wow, this game is way too light. So I actually didn't back it the first Kickstarter it came out. Now, it didn't need to be Kickstarter. You can buy it right now off Amazon if you wait for it. And so I didn't back it. And then they released a third Kickstarter called Verdant that we bought, and I could add the Kickstarter version in Cascadia because so many reviews talked about how much they loved it. So I'll say even when I first saw it on Kickstarter, I was like, this is way too light. This is way too whatever. My snobbery kicked in, and I was way, way wrong. So I'll admit that I was wrong. If there's one thing I wish was different is that it had if it went more than 4 players. Because, I mean, it's not as applicable now because my kids aren't at home, but our challenge when we were getting into hobby games was that so many of them play great at 4, only go to 4, so we struggled to find that 5-player game. That's a very, very small nitpick. You could probably do an expansion, add some more tiles, and now you're at 5-player. That's the way the flat-out games goes. Calico's only 4 players, and then Cascadia's 4 players. Verdant, I think, goes to 5 players, so it was their first one in their line that's that way. But for this one, they could do an expansion and basically just put in more tiles and make it go up to, and do the math to make it go up to 5. That's really my only feedback, negative feedback, or wish it was different, was that it went to 5 players.
Yeah, that's such an interesting take because Carcassonne was my first venture into tile laying as a game, and I know we talked about it in the first episode, but Carcassonne plays 2 to 5. And I until you're saying that, I didn't in my mind, I was like, why would Cascadia not be a 5-player game?
Right.
It's because they already have the system in place to eliminate X amount of tiles based on how many people are playing. It's such a simple, and so I wonder if it's okay, if we're going to play with, if you add the expansion, is there a different terrain as well as a new animal? And then you get to maybe that's how they added in. Very similar to when you have Settlers of Catan, their expansion adds a port, adds some more tiles, things like that. So I think it could be very easily expanded. I will say one aspect that personally for me, and I think it's because the part of the interaction, not in a gotcha manner, but part of what hobby gaming interaction for me has always been, or hobby gaming, the joy has been interacting with other players. And so I think for me, if I had to give it an initial knock, it is that it feels very solitaire-esque. And so sometimes I don't mind the solitaire-esque when there's something like Quacks where you're playing solitaire, yes, but also I'm kind of there's a thrill of everyone is pushing their luck together. Whereas this game is very the only player interaction that can happen is negative in theory, because the only time that I'm really oh man, you have affected my game is in a bad taste because you have taken the piece that I wanted. So if let's say I'm drafting after Jason, I think it could create some if you all have your places sitting at the table and you always sit at the same places and you're drafting in the same order, it could create some spite for this game to each other. And that is a little bit of a drawback for me just because of that. I can't even really root for, oh man, you're doing something really cool, because the only way for me to ever be involved with you other than just cheering across the table is in a sheer, I'm taking from you. So, I don't mind solitaire games, but that's my only gripe.
And it's a very fair point for sure, because sometimes this in Calico is a perfect example of that, because other than the draft, you're literally just playing by yourself, and you could have just played by yourself and have been the same game because it's so tight until you do the scoring. That's a fair point. I come and go with the games I like. I say typically I don't like games that have interaction, but that's not really true. There's some I do, even if it's positive interaction. Wingspan which I'm sure we'll talk about eventually, most of the player interaction is positive. Like I do something, everybody gets something, or if I take something from you, you get something else, right? And so there's plenty of player interaction that, everybody gets a cherry, everybody gets a grain because I activated this card. So that's a version of player interaction that is positive. And that's most of Jamie, totally different designer or a developer with Stomar Games. He very much likes positive interaction. He doesn't like negative interaction, but he'll talk about sometimes, and I don't think of that, but when you point out, it made sense that he wishes some games he played were more interaction, and sometimes that head down solo mode, single player solitaire, not solo mode, is not a bad thing. I can say this, while you were talking, I was like, I think Cascadia does have an expansion coming, and they do have an expansion coming that takes up to 6 players, which makes total sense because it's pure math for the tiles. So in 2024, it's called Cascadia Landmarks. I think there's not a firm date yet, but it says 2024 is going to take it up to 5 to 6 players. So that's exciting.
There's a very real chance that could be our first, with this being our first game. I have to imagine, right? Like, we're only a couple months away from 2024. That could be our first game we revisit in terms of like, did the expansion change our cookie rating? Speaking of which, you ready to dive into some ratings?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm gonna let you go first if that's okay. Because you came in with the cookie rating, which I love. So I want to kind of hear what you have to say about Cascadia as still the newer gamer with respect to Cascadia.
Yeah. So for me, we have our scale. If you're watching on YouTube, it's going to pop up on the screen now. But for me, I think it's not that I want to be like stingy with the double doozies because I don't want that, but I also feel like it diminishes the value of suggestion or the value of rating if we're like, oh, that's a double doozy and that's a double doozy. I really like that one. And I also, I want to remember what my first double doozy is going to be. Like I want it to be that game that like, wow. We have a game that I've played at Jason's house that I purchased before I went to bed that night. And like it was waiting for me so I know that game exists for me. But I'm not sure when it'll come on the episodes, but for Cascadia, I very much enjoyed it. I had a ton of fun with it, and I agree with the ease of play. I think from a sheer beginner standpoint, if you were getting into the hobby, which is sort of the heart of this podcast, is when you're getting into the hobby, what could you find? I think if you were very new into this would be a double doozy for you because there's so few. I mean, even if you look at the wrongs that Jason and I are suggesting that we have with the game, they're so particularly nitpicky. And so it's like, there's not really a flaw when it comes to the game. Like its flaw is that you could argue it's too simple. Its flaw is that it doesn't have a player. Its flaw is that, you know what? Like, I just wish I got to interact with more people kind of a deal. Like it's so there. I think why it's being knocked from a double doozy to me is that I'm not inviting people over to my house just because I want to play Cascadia again. I'm not like hunting for my next play of Cascadia. If I'm going to be traveling here soon to come up to Jason's house, if we decided, hey, we got an hour until we got to go somewhere, you want to play a quick game of Cascadia? I'm not going to be like, I don't know about that, Scooter. I may go take a nap instead. Like it is a good game that I'm excited to play, but I'm not craving playing it. And when I think about a double doozy, like I know the next time I go to Jason, I'm craving a double doozy, right? So for that reason, I'm actually going to drop it to a chocolate chip, but it's a strong chocolate chip cookie for me because of what it brings to you as board gamers. And there's a very real reason it was the first game that we wanted to talk about here on the podcast.
For sure, for certain. And I everything you said about that makes sense about the double doozy discussion, because depending on how I look at or how I come out for this game, it could be, if I was evaluating on the rating of it, is it for a beginner? Is this a double doozy and oatmeal raisin? To me, it's like, it's a double doozy. It's not quite, but it's close to being a perfect opening beginner game because the gameplay is so simple. It has scoring goals that are variety, so you can't get the variety gameplay over it. But if you have a brand new person who's never played the traditional hobby game, it's literally take a tile and an animal token and put it down. and that's it. And then as you play, you have the scoring goal. So it could be that. But for me, and in the way you talked for sure there, I have plenty of double doozy games. We've played some between Robbie and I, and there's some that we'll talk about on here for sure that will always be that way for me. I played a new one. We talked about Mosaic. It's probably a double doozy. It's a 10 on Board Game Geek for me. I love it that much, and it's a long game, so we don't play it a lot, but I'm ready to play it again. For this one, I was coming in. I wanted to hear you talk too because I was trying to go back and forth on it. I was leaning towards chocolate chip, but if I'm going to be totally transparent and honest, right? I have so many games that I rarely will say, let's just play Cascadia, because I have played it probably over 10 times by now, and I paid $40 for it. So $4 a play. I've gotten plenty of game time out of it. It'll still be one that I introduce new players to. As we host game nights here, as I get more newer players to come play, without doubt, it's a game that will be one of the first few ones I pull out in lieu of Cascadia, in lieu of Carcassonne. Carcassonne is the tile laying game most people talk about, but there are actually restrictions in Carcassonne between roads and your castles. You can't put them unless they're touching green and green. So there's a little bit of restriction that makes Carcassonne a little tighter. The reason why it's an OG, but it has restrictions, whereas Cascadia doesn't. So for me, I'm going to actually come back to chocolate chip. I was going back and forth between chocolate chip and peanut butter, but Elizabeth and I just played it tonight when we got home because I wanted it to be fresh on my mind for this. And especially knowing the expansion's coming, it's easy to be biased because I know that expansion's coming to give us some more variety. But having played 2 new animals tonight that we had never played, I'm like, oh wow, I haven't actually looked at Cascadia in that way, because we tend to, whenever we play with new players, we pick the easiest ones. We keep playing the easier ones, but now we've gotten those that are a little more challenging. I can easily say it's a chocolate chip. If I kept playing it, for me, it would drop down for sure. A cookie that's great, a cookie I like to eat, peanut butter, even a sugar cookie. But right now, it's a chocolate chip. It is definitely up there in my rating. I have it on Board Game Geek, which is the best website out there. You can do a rating of 1 to 10. I have it rated as like a 9.5 because the game itself is a 9.5 to me. So I think that's 2 chocolate chip cookies in the first podcast. It won't be always that way. We talked about there's definitely some games we're going to differ on, but I think that's a good rating for the 2 of us.
Absolutely. So let us know if you have played Cascadia and you're watching. Let us know where are you putting on the scale, or if you end up getting Cascadia because of this podcast, feel free to let us know how and got it, and then come back and let us know where it rates on the cookie scale. That's going to be my favorite part of audience interaction, is like your agreeance or disagreements on the cookie scale. So very, very excited about this. Jason, this is the next time we'll have recorded an episode, we'll have been together.
Yep, for sure. I'm very excited about that. And that's why I have a few games in my mind for future episodes, but I don't even know what the next one will be because it'll be driven by our weekend together. Robbie's coming up for an event for our disc golf life, and we're going to host a game night at my place at where I work. And so we're going to have some other, ideally newer gamers, brand new gamers there. So it's the perfect night for he and I to just kind of talk to these folks and play some games with them. Maybe Cascadia, maybe a game we talk about in the next episode. But that, on top of that, he and I will definitely, even after that, we'll stay up a little bit later than we should and play some games at night as well. So it's going to be exciting because we'll be recording the episode like literally a few days after you leave. So everything will be fresh on our mind for that.
I am looking forward to it. Well, everyone, we want to say thank you as always for tuning in. Jason, we did better. We're like 6 minutes shorter on this episode than we were last. So we're getting it dialed in. We're gonna get it right around that, like just under an hour. I believe in us. So thank you to everyone for listening, and thank you for giving us your time. We are so glad that you sat with us at the table, and we look forward to seeing you in episode number 3.
All right, we'll see y'all again. Take care.